I'm Diane Kresh. I'm director of the Arlington County Public Library. Delighted to see so many of you here this evening for this this interesting program. I've actually read the book. It's a lot of fun. It's a great roll through history, the kind of history that many of us at a certain time would have liked to have lived, and he actually did it. So that's fun, and it's a great companion piece to another book that we have in our collection that I poured over last year, Life, the autobiography of Keith Richards, which is a terrific book. If you haven't read it and you're at all a fan of the era or the Stones or just the music biz in general, it's fascinating and a lot of fun. The Rolling Stones is one of those groups that's sort of been around forever. In fact, this is their 50th anniversary this year, which if you do the math, they've been doing something like this since about 1962. I first picked them up somewhere in my early teens, and most significant times of my life in sort of late teens, high school, early 20s had something to do with the Rolling Stones and their music as a backdrop. I will say, however, that I'm actually more of a Who fan, so I know, I like the Stones, you know, blah, 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 but the Who were really the band that I was most interested in, probably stayed interested in, maybe for a little bit too long, but nevertheless. But it's going to be an exciting evening tonight. We are going to be having in a couple of months our Arlington Reads program, and we're delighted to announce that Jennifer Egan, author of A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is kind of tangentially about the music biz, is going to be one of our featured authors. So if you like music and talking about music and the impact of music on our lives and art and redemption and all that other good stuff, keep in mind the Jennifer Egan program. This program is brought to us tonight courtesy of Friends of the Arlington Public Library. They're a great organization for us. We depend on them for a lot of heavy lifting. They have the 2 annual book sales, but they sponsor so many of our programs and summer reading for kids and all kinds of things. So we're delighted that they also support these little endeavors into popular music. So I'll stop talking and turn the program over to Bill. He's going to be available to sign books afterwards, so you all can reminisce about back in the day with Ronnie and Bill and Charlie and the gang. Probably not too much about Brian anymore, but for a while, I guess he was sort of one of the leaders of the group. Yes, so, all right, so thank you for coming, and enjoy the program.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. They tell me that this mic works, too. Can you hear me on this? Okay. So I usually start by reading the intro from the book. That's the cover, as you can see. And then we'll take it from there, and I'll show you a bunch of photos, and then after that, I'll take questions. And let's see if I could find the intro of my own book. Okay, here we go. You'll probably want to kill me when I say my only job in life was with the Rolling Stones. Even as a teenager, I wasn't mowing lawns, washing cars, or asking if you want fries with that. I was traipsing after my favorite rock band and writing about it in Beggar's Banquet, the newsletter I launched on my 16th birthday. When I published the first issue, I had no idea where it would lead or how it would dictate the course of my life. I shouldn't have been with the Stones in the first place. To be welcomed into their orbit, you have to bring something to their table, like drugs or sex or fame or the ability to carry their luggage better than anyone else. But all I had was my stupid little newsletter. This is the story of how I made it into the Stones' inner sanctum and how I crawled out. It's also about the overachievers and the underachievers, the groupies, the pushers, and the flunkies that I met along the way. People who dedicated their entire lives to remaining in that sanctum. Some of them are still there, and some of them got carried off in handcuffs or caskets. But all of us lived our dream of hanging with the Rolling Stones. Be careful what you wish for. So, you know, I started as just a regular fan like anybody else in this room. And I'm 49 now. So I was born in 1962, September. And I actually had not even heard the Stones, or I think I hadn't even heard of the Stones until I was 10 years old, end of 1972. And to that point, I mean, I just knew like the top 40 bands. And if you didn't have a Saturday morning TV show, I never heard of you. So the bands that I knew were the Monkees and the Beatles and the Jackson 5. Well, one day, I hear these crazy sounds coming from my sister's bedroom. And it's like the most violent sounds I'd ever heard in my life. And the song lyrics that don't even make sense. A guy saying, I was born in a crossfire hurricane. Like, what does that even mean? And then the song is over and I hear applause. And I hear the same guy say, I think I popped a button on my trousers. Hope my trousers don't fall down. I'm like, what is this? So I ask my sister who it is. And she shows me the album cover and starts showing me all these other album covers. And I was totally intrigued with it. And these guys look pretty cool. I mean, like, they could definitely beat up the Monkees, you know? So I instantly became a fan of the Stones, wanted to know everything about them, and I started getting books about them. I borrowed all the albums from my sister and, learned all the lyrics. I mean, there were some lyrics in these songs that I couldn't even say in my house at the age of 10. They had a song called Bitch, a whole song called Bitch. I mean, if I went around my house saying the word bitch, I would get a bar of soap in my mouth. And they have a song title called Bitch. So to me, they seem like the most rebellious people on earth. And I wanted to know everything about them. Started buying tons of books, magazines. Every time they were on the cover of Rolling Stone or Cream magazine, I went out and bought it. And I realized, like, look at these guys that are writing about the Stones and the people that are talking about them on the radio. That job is for me. They get paid to talk about the Stones and go to Stones concerts. So I figured, one day, I am going to write about the Rolling Stones. The problem is, at this point, I'm 10, 11, 12, 13. So I waited a little while, and on my 16th birthday, I started my own magazine called Beggar's Banquet. And look how professional it is. So it's the week of my 16th birthday, September 1978, and what's going on with the Stones? Well, Keith Don't Go refers to the fact that Keith was about to go on trial in Canada for heroin possession and was possibly going to go away for a long time. So Keith Don't Go. And then Stones Live from New York has to do with the fact that the Stones were about to play Saturday Night Live, which I considered like my generation's Beatles on Sullivan. I thought that was like an incredible performance. Even though they played terribly, it was just like a great performance. So that's what I was covering in my early issues. Mind you, I wasn't giving you anything that TV Guide wasn't. I mean, I'm just telling you, well, the Stones are going to be on Saturday Night Live. I mean, I had no context. I'm just a 16-year-old kid. And so I typed the insides of it, but how do you get the large lettering for the cover? This is my cover that, I'm going to try to get newsstand sales from. So, because in 1978, nobody has a PC. Nobody, there's no Kinkos on every corner. So in order to get letters that big, I had to do it myself. And then how do you print this thing? I mean, think back to 1978. The only places that had copy machines were libraries and banks. And you would go to the bank with your check or whatever, or you come to the library, you put your library book on it, and you put a dime in, and it would take about 60 seconds for like this disgusting copy to ooze out. And I tried that with my first, issue, and I realized like this is not going to work. And then I realized I have a friend who works in the mimeograph room at my high school. And he was able to sneak me in there after hours. He was a volunteer, he had the keys, and so I ran off all the early copies on the Board of Ed's dime. I didn't pay a cent. I probably still owe New York City Board of Ed, like $20 or something for ink and paper. And so as you can see, I mean, it looked terrible, the information was horrible, but at least it smelled great, if you remember mimeograph. And sometimes I have young kids in the audience, they don't know what I'm talking about. Mimeograph, what is that? I mean, young kids just have to, click and put, this was, cut and paste literally meant to cut and to paste, scissors and glue. I had to glue down that photo and glue little things. So now what do I do with these 100 copies that I printed? Well, I'm going to try to sell them to the kids in my high school. But the thing you have to remember about 1978, especially in Brooklyn, is that we are in the throes of Saturday Night Fever. And so, I mean, I grew up with all the stereotypes there in Brooklyn. So all the guys talk like this. They wanted to be like Tony Manero. The girls would only date guys that were like Tony Manero. And here I come up to them, these disco heads, and say, hey, you want to buy my Stones fanzine, my Stones newsletter? And none of them were interested. In fact, I recently bumped into someone from back then who claims I paid him to take a copy. And I was charging 25 cents, made no sales, no one was interested. Occasionally, some of these guys would say, oh yeah, the Stones, those are the guys that do Misuse, right? Because, you know, they had a little bit of, you know, the disco thing going on with that song. But otherwise, no one cared about the Stones where I was from, my little portion of Brooklyn. So the great irony is that it was the Stones in the end that wound up, you know, loving my little newsletter here instead of my own high school friends. So I was undaunted and decided to just keep this newsletter going because I just love the Stones so much. And I love journalism. I was taking a class in high school, a journalism class, and you know, I knew one way or another I would be a journalist. So I kept going, and eventually, you know, it started to look a little bit better, see? Right? And what happened was I got to know certain people who would see the Stones around town. So if there's one part of my story where luck plays in, it's location, location, location. I'm living in New York City, Brooklyn, New York, and the Stones are three of them anyway, are living in New York City. Mick and Keith and Ronnie Wood are all living in New York City, in Manhattan, you know, a subway ride away from me. So I was too young to get into these nightclubs that they were going to, but every night they were going to nightclubs, sometimes getting up on stage and playing, totally spontaneous. And I would get that information from grown-ups that I would meet like in record stores, or some I was actually pen pals with. There were people that lived in New York and I was pen pals, you know, long before email. And they would tell me like, oh, well, Keith got up on stage at a club called Tracks last night and he played with Mac Guitar Murphy and this and that. And so I put all that information into my newsletter. I started to get to know some photographers also, and it started to become a little more professional, and through word of mouth, I got you know, some subscribers. My circulation went up to a few hundred, and started looking more professional. So I don't know if anybody would know what I'm talking about, but there's a thing called Letraset. Anybody? Yeah, one person. And these were rub-on letters, and so that's how I got someone else. So yeah, so you had to do each letter at a time, you know, B, O. It was like painstaking. But anyway, so it started to look a little more professional, and the content was more professional, and I started to feel kind of proud of my thing. And now I'm 17 years old, and I'm thinking, well, gosh, I think the Stones themselves should see my little creation finally. So I found out that they were having a party at a club called Danceteria in Manhattan on 38th Street, and it was for their Emotional Rescue album. And it was an afternoon party, which was kind of surprising because I thought Keith didn't wake up before 3 o'clock. But anyway, this was for the press, and so they had this party, and I figured, let me show up with a handful of my newsletters, and I will present it to them. And so I do. And so here's Keith. And this you'll recognize as the cover of the book. So here's Keith walking down 38th Street in Manhattan with his best friend, Jack Daniels, there, if you can see. And there's me in the background, 17 years old, meeting the Stones for the first time. And off camera is Ron Wood here. You can see his hand. But I am handing Ron Wood a copy of my newsletter. Almost like a process server, like here, you've been served. So the interesting thing is that, you know, I waited for them to come out of this club, and Mick comes out first, and he gives off a vibe like, don't come near me, I'm just going to get in my limo and go and drive, and that's it, don't come near me. And I didn't take it personally, because that's Mick. He always has his defenses up. He always has a wall up around him. And then Keith and Ronnie Wood come out, and Keith is, you know, totally the opposite, you know, and Keith's willing to shake hands with fans on the street and sign autographs, you know, because this was in the middle of a workday in Manhattan, and people saw the limousines. At first, I was the only person waiting for the Stones to come out, but people getting out of work at around 5 o'clock saw these limousines and were asking me, like, what's going on in this nightclub during the day? And I said, well, the Rolling Stones are in there. So pretty soon there was like a large group of people. And so Keith came out, you can't tell from this picture, but he's like shaking hands with everybody and signing and things like that and chatting. And I saw my opportunity to go up to Ron Wood and give him the newsletter, and so that's what I did. And then they take it into their limousine, and for some reason the window was rolled down. I could see them like looking at my newsletter and like pointing, yeah, that's the guy that gave it to me. And, you know, and it's like, I'm just this 17-year-old kid, and they're like smiling at me. I'm like, wow, like, okay, they have finally acknowledged me. My favorite rock band knows I exist, and they know that my little newsletter exists. So the reason I chose this for the cover is because, well, it captures the first time I ever met the Stones. So like, this is what started this whole mess. And, but also it captures a lot of what the book is about, which is the Stones' accessibility in New York City. And they really were like a New York band for a bunch of years. And this kind of captures it, that you really could bump into Keith Richards walking down the streets of New York. And then the other thing is, as soon as I decided to write a book about my experiences, I decided I would call it Under Their Thumb. And you could see, here's Keith with his thumb out, like he's hitchhiking. I don't know why, you know, he's got a limo waiting for him, but it looks like he's hitchhiking. And I just said, well, that clinches it. Like, oh my God, you know, this is the perfect picture for the cover. I didn't even know that this photo was taken at the time. It was taken by a paparazzi photographer that was waiting for the Stones to come out of the club. And I didn't know this photographer at all. I had no idea that it was photographed. But one day, many years later, I was going through some files in this photo agency, and I came across this photo. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that the moment that I met the Stones was actually captured in a photograph. So that had to be the cover of the book. So what happened is, eventually, I become old enough to start getting into some of these nightclubs, and even before I got in, I was able to get in anyway. The drinking age was 18 in New York, so even when I was 17, I started to go to some clubs. And so I started to go to some of these nightclubs, trying to run into them, and eventually, as you can see, I did. And I would just give them the newsletter. That's it. One of the interesting things is I also used to drop off copies of every issue to their office. They had an office called Rolling Stones Records, which was in Rockefeller Center, right where they have the Christmas tree every year and the skating rink. And so I would go up to their office and drop off my issues, and the people there would say, oh, we give them to the Stones. We pass them along to the Stones. And I'm a teenage kid, but even I knew, like, oh, they're just humoring me. Well, guess what? They weren't humoring me, because I would see Keith, and this is his, at the time she was his girlfriend, Patty Hansen, but they married later this year. And I would give the issue to someone like Keith, and he would say, yeah, I've already got this one. Yeah. I really enjoy reading them on the can. Like, wow. Not only does Keith know who I am, he's enjoying it, and he's reading it on the can, you know. So it was like, wow. So it was like very heady stuff for a teenager, you know, to be acknowledged like that, that they know who I am. And, you know, same thing with Ron Wood. So, and, you know, and he would be like, oh yeah, I've got this one. Yeah, where's the next one? You know, so yeah, it was really nice. And, you know, sometimes I would just want to give them the issue and walk away, and, you know, no, stick around, have a drink, or Keith, you know, yeah, have a seat, man. And so it was just like very encouraging for me as a teenage kid, you know, 18, 19, 20, to you know, be acknowledged like that. And then 1981 rolls around, and they go on their Tattoo You tour, and so this is one of the issues I did during that tour. And I decided I'm going to try to follow this tour as much as I can. And in order to do that, at this point, I'm going to New York University, where I'm majoring in journalism. And I walk in one morning at breakfast to my parents, and I inform them that I'm dropping out of college to follow the Rolling Stones. That was not a fun conversation. But once we picked Mom up off the floor, they just kind of learned to deal with it, and you know, accepted the fact that, you know, I was very determined to do this, and, you know, I was the kind of kid where my parents didn't get phone calls from the cops, you know, like come pick up your kid. So I think they kind of trusted me, and my parents, they didn't encourage me to follow the Stones, but they didn't discourage me. And I think maybe it was reverse psychology. They gave me all this trust, and I didn't want to abuse it. So, so I wind up going on the tour with the Stones, you know, just following it on my own dime. And you know, I see their opening show in Philadelphia. I see the smallest show that they do is in a theater in Atlanta called the Fox Theater. So I see them down there. That was great. And then I was at the final show of the tour, the final couple of shows, which were in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And that's the one that was on pay-per-view. It was the Stones' first ever pay-per-view concert. And that's the one where, I don't know if you guys have seen it. If not, you can YouTube it. But where a fan, I see someone knows exactly where I'm going with this. A fan comes running up on stage. Now, this was Keith's birthday. And when they're doing Satisfaction, all of these balloons are coming down and all that. And a fan comes running on stage. I saw him from the corner of my eye. I thought it was a roadie, but the guy doesn't stop. And he just goes straight towards Keith. And, well, what does Keith do, man? He takes off his guitar and just slugs the guy right in the chest, man. And he doesn't miss a beat. He just puts his guitar back on. And you know, the kid gets dragged off, never to be seen again. And after the show, I was lucky enough to go backstage for Keith's birthday party, because by now I'm starting to get to know certain people in the Stones organization. And I go backstage, and I didn't ask Keith about the situation, but I asked Ronnie Wood, and he said that he had just spoken to Keith, saying like, you know, why'd you do that? You know, he's just a fan, obviously. Just wanted to shake your hand for your birthday. And Keith told him, yeah, how do you know he didn't have a gun, right? Or a knife, you know? Which, you know, Keith had a point, because it was exactly a year after John Lennon. And also in 1981, there were some high-profile assassination attempts, you know, Ronald Reagan, the Pope, Anwar Sadat. So, you know, assassination was on people's minds, and, you know, it was no longer a time when your biggest fan just wanted to like get a lock of your hair or rip a button off, you know, like they had in the 60s. Now it's like your biggest fan could put a hole in you, you know. So I kind of understand where Keith was coming from. So I did the 1981 tour, and you know, got to know more people in the organization. The Stones kind of, you know, start to see me around a bit. And one day I get a phone call from their management saying that they want to turn my little newsletter that I started by typing in my pajamas in my bedroom and printed in the high school, that they want to turn my newsletter into the official Rolling Stones newsletter that will be seen around the world and advertised in their next album. And so that's the flyer. I was talking to someone earlier who said that they subscribe from here. And so this is a flyer that went inside 1 million copies of the Undercover album. And at this point, I'm like 20 years old. And you know, so I'm talking to the Stones management, and the guy says to me, okay, so here's what's going to happen. Well, we're going to advertise your little newsletter in the next Stones album. And then, you know, you'll get to interview them. You'll get to travel around with them. You'll get to go to their recording sessions. You'll go backstage whenever they have their concerts. Is that okay with you? So yeah, that was a real hard one to think about. So next thing I know, I am interviewing Mick at his house on the Upper West Side. And so now this photo was not taken at his house, but I figured I would show you a photo from the same time period, just to show you what I'm looking like and what Mick's looking like around that time. The guy on the left is a bodyguard. This was taken at a party in New York. The guy on the left, I don't know who he is. He was just a bodyguard I've never seen before or since. And yeah, this is me presenting Mick with the latest issue and all that, and so that got snapped. So Mick had a 5-story townhouse on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, 81st Street. And I go over there to interview him for the first official issue of the newsletter. And he welcomes me in the kitchen, and we go upstairs, and we get to the top floor. He brings me to his den, and we hear the shrieking of young girls. Like, what is that? And Mick says, you know, this is like one of the nicest neighborhoods in New York, and it's usually quiet, but sometimes it gets a little noisy. It must be recess. I'm like, what? Well, it turns out, and you'd think that there would be a law against this, but Mick Jagger was living next door to an all-girl middle school. So, all right, it must be recess. We'll close the window. And so we do our interview. It was a pretty good interview. Mick, he's not such a great interview. Sometimes he can be very guarded and give you like one-sentence answers. Sometimes he'll give you one-word answers. It was the day after my 21st birthday, and I'm sitting in Mick Jagger's house interviewing him. So that was pretty exciting. And so overall, he gave me a good interview. And I decided I would ask him, what music is he listening to right now? So he says, good one, Bill. Let me go and look at my turntable. So he goes into the corner of the room, like this alcove, and he looks at his turntable, and then I hear him flipping through albums, and he's calling back out to me. Listen to the latest Herbie Hancock, because the album with the song Rocket had just come out. This is 1983 now. And he says, Bette Midler's latest one I like. And so anyway, I say to myself, like, let me see what books he's reading. So I get up to look at his bookcase, except that as I do that, I accidentally knock over a glass of orange juice that I had at my foot. And now I am watching this pint of Minute Maid OJ go all over Mick Jagger's 16th century Persian rug. And I'm like, oh my God, Mick, and because he's still in the alcove over there, Mick, and then I realized, no, he's not. Where is he? And I'm just standing over this puddle like an idiot, like, oh my God. Great thing to do on my first visit ever to Mick Jagger's house. And I don't know what to do. Well, it turns out he had seen the whole thing, comes back into the room, and he has a towel in his hands. And he gets on his hands and knees and starts blotting up my mess. And that is a vision I will remember for the rest of my life. That I'm 21 years old and a day, 21 years and one day old, and I'm standing over Mick Jagger on his hands and knees with a towel. But he couldn't have been any more gracious about it. Like, no, don't worry about it. It's all right. And I was like, please don't tell your living girlfriend, Jerry Hall, about this. No, it's okay. Besides, this is my room. So I was like, oh, okay. And, this was like Mick on a good day. He can be really nice and gracious sometimes, and then he could be kind of nasty too. And a little later, I'll tell you one of the nasty stories. But I have a chapter in the book called A Nice Bunch of Guys, and it's all about Mick, because he can be a nice bunch of guys, multiple personalities. And that's an actual phrase that I didn't come up with. That was Keith and Ronnie Wood started calling him a nice bunch of guys, because you never know from one day to the next, or even 1 hour to the next, or 1 minute to the next, which Mick you're going to get, or the accent he's going to give you. Very unpredictable. So another thing that I remember about this interview is the phone rings while we're doing the interview, and my tape recorder's running. And it just rings and rings, no answering machine picks it up. And Jerry Hall, his girlfriend, was in the house. She doesn't pick it up. So finally, like on the 7th or 8th ring, he picks it up. Yeah, and it sounded like he was putting on a voice. Like, it sounded like he was putting on like an old Spanish lady's accent. Hello? And then obviously, the person asks for Jerry Hall. And Mick says, who is calling? And whoever it is says who they are. And then he said, oh, yeah, okay, hang on. And then, then he yelled down to Jerry, pick up the phone, whatever. We're trying to work here. You got to pick up the phone. But it occurs to me that Mick Jagger screens his own phone calls by pretending to be his cleaning lady. So, as if it wasn't already like one of the greatest birthday presents ever, the day after my 21st birthday, that I'm interviewing Mick Jagger. On the same day, I go to interview Keith. And this time, this also is not where the interview was conducted. But of course, once again, he has the Jack Daniels close by, his good friend Jack Daniels. And there we are looking over a dummy copy of the first official issue. And this was actually taken in a bar. My interview actually took place in the Stones' office in Rockefeller Center. But again, this is a picture that was around the same time period, just to show you what Keith was looking like and what I was looking like. So Keith really is a much better interview than Mick. Keith is almost too good of an interview. I tell journalists that when you're interviewing Keith, you sometimes have to cut him off. You don't want to, but you have to, because if you're allotted a certain amount of time, like a half hour or an hour, he'll just go on forever, and you will have asked like one or two of your questions. And like, that's the end of the interview. It's like, oh my God, you know. So Keith loves to philosophize, and you know, but in a good way. It's like great stuff, great material. Obviously, the guy just came out with a 500-page book. So, you know, that day he spoke to me about a bunch of different things that I asked him about. He told me about, well, he talked about his drug addiction, which I had asked him about. I don't know if I was like stupid or naive or brave, I don't know, but I asked him certain things that he normally didn't talk about at that time. And he admitted that he was the weak link in the chain, and that he had almost cost the Stones their career by, you know, being caught up with heroin and almost going to jail and all that. So he admitted that, and he said, I realized that Mick carried a lot of the burden when I was going through my stuff. And then related to drugs, we were talking about John Belushi, because Belushi had passed away recently, and I asked him, like, did you see it coming? And he said, you did see it coming, but there's nothing you could say to him, because John Belushi was like Brian Jones, he told me. And by the way, this is the only time Keith and I ever discussed Brian Jones. But he said that Belushi and Brian Jones were similar in that they just had an overdo it kind of attitude with everything in life. And the problem is, when you tell them to pull back, they will just go the other way and overdo it even more. So you couldn't say anything to John Belushi. And so he wasn't surprised when Belushi died. You know, Keith was actually with him a few weeks beforehand. I also asked Keith about his father. He and his father had been estranged for 20 years, and then they reunited shortly before our interview. And he gave me some insight about that, you know, that Keith's parents got divorced just as the Stones were starting to make it big. And then he lost touch with his dad, and at first it was 5 years, and then 10 years, 15 years, and then you realize, like, oh my God, it's 20 years, and I haven't spoken to my father. But they reunited, and they were inseparable ever since. And as we all know, you may have heard that Keith snorted his father's ashes. That's how close he felt to his dad. So the interesting thing about the Keith interview is, well, we spoke for 3 hours, which, you know, was great. But at some point, the interview had to end, and we left. It was already about 9 o'clock, and we're in this office building in Rockefeller Center. And the elevators are locked. We had to take a freight elevator. And as we're waiting for the elevator, a guy comes up to us. And so it's me, Keith, and this woman that worked for Keith. And it's just the three of us, and a guy comes up with a mop and pail. So he's obviously one of the porters. And Keith strikes up a conversation with this guy like he knows him. And the reason is because he does know him. We get in the elevator, and Keith says, yeah, how you doing? Is your daughter, right, just started school, you know, how's she like it? You know, and the guy answers in his broken English, oh, she likes school very, very much, you know, whatever. And, you know, it occurred to me that I got, like, more information about Keith Richards' character in those 3 minutes on the elevator than the whole 3 hours when I interviewed him. And that is the difference, and I'm speaking from personal experience, between Mick and Keith. You know, here's Mick, who's trying to avoid someone. He's pretending to be someone else, screening his phone calls. And here's Keith, who goes out of his way to talk to just an average guy, a porter in an office building. And so that's always stuck with me all these years later. So my first official issue comes out, and I called it, you probably can't see it, but I refer to it as Volume 2, Number 1, because I had been doing Volume 1 so long, although when I was doing Volume 1, I didn't call it Volume 1, because I didn't know that there would be a Volume 2, sort of like how they didn't call World War I at the time. So, so the information here is Keith gets hitched, and here is Keith in his wedding tux, and Mick, who was his best man. Mick was the only Stone at the wedding. This is he got married in Mexico. Mick and Keith discuss Undercover. That was their new album. and that's the one that had the insert in there advertising my newsletter. And so, I mean, I interviewed Keith for 3 hours, so I broke it up into like several issues. But in this one, I just put the portion where they were discussing the new album. Arms Build-Up refers to a benefit concert that Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts were involved in. I think it was Artists for Research into Multiple Sclerosis, so ARMS. And Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts came to New York to take part in that concert. So all that was jam-packed into my first official issue. And, it was a bit of a trade-off becoming the official newsletter. So obviously I had all this access now. I'm going to Mick Jagger's house. I'm hanging out with Keith, But it was a give and take, because now they would tell me what stuff should go in and what stuff shouldn't. And when I say they, I mean Keith, he was fine with me putting anything in there. But Mick, could get a little tricky at times, and then their management and their lawyers had to look at it, their accountants, I think Mick's gardener once looked at it. I mean, just like everybody had to take a look at this thing and tell me what goes in and what doesn't go in. So, for instance, this cover photo was not my initial choice. My initial choice was a close-up of Mick and Keith, the same photo that was used in that flyer that went out to 1 million people inside the Undercover album. And so I go to print with it, and then Mick calls up and says, no, change the cover, I don't like that photo. And it's like, but 1 million people just saw it in the Undercover album. No, don't like it, change it. And so I wound up using that photo instead. And by the way, it had already been running. The printing press was already running, and so there were like 20,000 wasted covers. And you better believe the printer was charging for it, but at this point, the Stones were paying for everything. Then I wrote something that when the Stones were down in Mexico City, where they were shooting some videos for the Undercover album, that they were the guests of honor at a party one night. And they all went except for Mick. And that's exactly how I worded it. All the Stones attended this party except for Mick. No, don't like it. Well, why? Well, no, don't want to be conspicuous. He didn't want to be conspicuous by his absence. And, well, why is that? Well, because while the Stones were down there in Mexico City, Mick, how shall we say, was pursuing some outside taco, which would have been fine if he was a carefree single guy, but Jerry Hall was back home in New York 7 months pregnant. And so he did not want to be conspicuous. So, I had to change the wording. And so instead of writing, they were all there except for Mick, I wrote Keith and Ronnie and Charlie and Bill all attended the party, And Jerry Hall can connect her own dots, because I work for Mick now. Then we had Bill Wyman. So after that ARMS concert at Madison Square Garden, I wind up going to a party. And Charlie Watts is there, and Bill Wyman's there. And Bill Wyman's really nice. He introduces me to his girlfriend, a very nice woman named Kelly. And so in the next issue, I want to print a photo of them together. And he doesn't want that photo in there. And the reason is, as I found out, Kelly was his New York girlfriend. And he didn't want the London girlfriend to find out about the New York girlfriend, didn't want the LA girlfriend to find out about the London one, San Francisco. It's best if you don't print photos of me with anybody. It's a deal. So, okay. And then you had this woman who worked for Keith, who's now his manager. Her name is Jane Rose. And she was a real stickler. And one time she made me take out the word stumbled. I just wrote something simple like, Keith stumbled into the Ritz nightclub, to see a band or something. And she said, no, I don't like the word stumbled. I'm like, well, what do you mean? It's just a figure of speech. And she said, no, stumbled might imply that Keith was stoned, and we wouldn't want anyone to think that. So like I said, it was a trade-off. Great access now. I'm going to the houses and all that. But, as a journalist, which is really what got me into this, in addition to being a Stones fan, it was a little tough on me. And, I had to do a delicate dance with each issue. And, like I said, Keith and Ronnie Wood, they didn't mind. I could write anything I want. They were totally welcoming to me. And so it comes time for them to record their Dirty Work album. And there we are at a studio called RPM on 12th Street in Manhattan. And Keith was so nice. We're looking at the latest issue, obviously. And Keith was so nice. He said to me, Bill, you can stop up any time, man, as long as Brenda's not there. I'm like, Brenda? Who's Brenda? Well, as some of you may know by now, Brenda was Keith's nickname for Mick, and it was not a term of endearment. And now it's been, written about, it's become mythologized and all that, but at the time, in 1985, nobody knew about this, and it was just a little private joke amongst a handful of people, and I was one of those handful of people. And obviously, I couldn't write about it in the newsletter. And the thing you have to realize is that this was the height of Mick and Keith's feud, or at least the beginning of their feud. And that summer, Keith would have liked to have stabbed Mick in the eyeballs with a knife. So referring to him as Brenda was a much healthier way to vent, I think. And the way he came up with the name, by the way, is he was in a bookstore one day and sees a book by an author named Brenda Jagger. And so it just kind of stuck. And so that was it. Behind Mick's back, he was Brenda. So the way it worked is, I was welcome anytime, unless Brenda was there. I had to call the studio and, speak to, usually Ronnie would pick up the phone and I would say, is Brenda there? And he would tell me no, or Brenda's about to leave, or whatever, something like that. So this photo actually was taken at 5 o'clock in the morning, because there was one time when I didn't get to the studio until after 4 o'clock, because Mick stayed late, So, and the thing is that, there was the Mick camp and the Keith camp. Now, all this got started around this time period because Mick did a solo album instead of working with the Stones. The Stones signed a contract with CBS Records, and there was a little tiny clause in that contract that said Mick can do a solo album. Keith probably didn't even look at the tiny little print, that little clause. And next thing you know, Mick, instead of working with the Stones on their next album, is recording a solo album. And that really upset Keith. And, he felt that Mick was putting himself over the rest of the band. And so that was like the crux of their big feud. And so now when the Stones finally are contractually obligated to cut the Dirty Work album, Mick and Keith were barely speaking to each other and would come to the studio at different times. Mick was usually there from 7 p.m. to midnight, and then Keith and Ronnie would first get there at about 1 o'clock in the morning and stay until about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. Mick's people couldn't be there when Keith was there, and vice versa. Keith hated the fact that when he wasn't there, Mick would bring up bands like Duran Duran, who Keith despised. In fact, he used to call them deranged. And Keith felt like, why, you are Mick Jagger, why are you hanging out with these flavors of the month, these stupid kids who have no connection to our lineage, as the Rolling Stones? So when Mick wasn't around, Keith was bringing up guys like Don Covey, the legendary R&B singer, Bobby Womack, also a legendary blues guy who used to play with Sam Cooke. So Keith is bringing up guys like that, or Jimmy Cliff, the reggae guy. And Mick is bringing up Duran Duran and Paul Young. If you ever even remember Paul Young, oh boy, don't put Keith and you in the same room. Okay. So anyway, so Keith hated that stuff. So that was the thing. So, there was a real fine, there was a line in the sand there. And so I couldn't come when Mick was there, and vice versa. If Keith was there, Mick couldn't bring his friends up there. So the other interesting thing, like I said, Mick would come from 7 p.m. to midnight, and Keith would first get there with Ronnie around 1 a.m. So overnight, Keith and Ronnie wrote most of the songs on the Dirty Work album. But, Mick and Keith have a relationship like Lennon and McCartney, where it all had to say Jagger Richards, the way it always said Lennon and McCartney. But Mick really did not contribute a lot of stuff to the Dirty Work album. It was mostly Keith and Ronnie who were writing this stuff on the fly. They would come into the studio with all this pent-up anger towards Mick and just write stuff off the top of their heads. And so that's why you have song titles on that album like one hit to the body, because that's what they wanted to do to Mick, give him one hit to his body. There's another song called Fight, or I Wanna Fight is the longer title. Then there's one called I've Had It With You. So the thing that I love about it is that, so Keith and Ronnie, it's like 3, 4 in the morning, and they're coming up with like the basics of these songs, I've Had It With You. And then Mick comes in the following day, so all right, let's see what Keith has here. I've had it, I've had it, I've had it, I've had it with you, which is great, but Mick, you're singing the song to yourself, so just so you know. And he didn't know until my book came out, I guess. And I should mention, by the way, that there was another song that got left off the album called I'm Gonna Knock Your Teeth Out One by One. So it was really flattering and encouraging that I got to spend time up there with Keith and Ronnie. They welcomed me anytime. And like I said, Keith hated the guests that Mick would bring up. And so here's a sign that Keith put up in the studio. I don't know if you can read it where you're sitting, but so I'll do it for you. Stop. This is a closed session. Do not enter. No exceptions. Even if you met Mick or Ronnie in a club and they said, call in, do not enter. And then if you could see on the bottom, skull and crossbones with blood coming out. And at the very bottom, have a nice day. So like I said, I was pretty flattered that I got to hang out there because Keith really didn't want any of Mick or even Ronnie's friends coming over. Ronnie used to bring in people like Billy Idol, and Keith couldn't stand Billy Idol. And Keith felt that Billy Idol stole a song title from them. Billy Idol had a song called Rebel Yell, you may know. And where does Billy Idol come to Rebel Yell? One of Keith's favorite bourbons. But that's what happened. Billy Idol is in the studio and he sees a bottle of Rebel Yell that belonged to Keith, and he makes a song title out of it. So Keith didn't like a lot of the newcomers, If you weren't like some hunchback black guy from the Mississippi Delta playing the blues, like Keith wasn't interested in your music. An interesting thing happens, which is that during these sessions, Ian Stewart passes away. And as many of you know, Ian Stewart was one of the founding members of the Stones. We're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Stones. So way back in 1962, Ian Stewart was one of the original band members when they were a 6-piece. And then when Andrew Loog Oldham started managing them, he pushed Ian Stewart out of the band. But the other guys loved Ian Stewart so much that they kept him around, working in their office. And then Ian Stewart still played piano like on almost all of their albums, on all of their tours, but in the background. He would literally be sitting in the dark during some of their concerts. So they loved Ian Stewart, and he was kind of the glue that held them together for a lot of years. And now he dies at the age of 47. And he was the one guy that didn't do any drugs or booze or anything. He was overweight. His big vice was eating cheeseburgers, and it eventually did him in. He had a heart attack. So it really kind of shook up the Stones. And they decided that they would do a memorial for him in London. And they would all be attending this. And I realized the prospect was there that the 5 Stones, who all hated each other, might take the stage and play at this nightclub. And so I was 23 years old at this point. It was February 1986. And I went and got my first ever passport just to go to London to see the possibility of the Stones playing, because who knows if they will ever play again. They hate each other. So they do all unite, and it's in a small nightclub on Oxford Street in London called the 100 Club. And it's for 200 invited guests, and I was one of them. Keith and Ronnie invited me. And like I said, I flew over just for that. And no one knew if they would play. Even they didn't know. But at one point, all 5 of them are up on stage, and they are doing song. And like I said, the room is smaller than this, or maybe about the same size. 200 people all crammed in. And they're doing blues songs. They're not even doing Stone songs. They're doing blues songs that Ian Stewart would have wanted them to do if he was there. And that's the part that I love about it. And if that's not mind-blowing enough for you to be in a small room seeing the Stones on stage, they then invite some of their friends up with them to jam. So here we have Pete Townsend up there. And then Eric Clapton came up, and Jeff Beck came up, and Jack Bruce came up. So it was like mind-blowing. If you ever ask me, Bill, what's your favorite concert of all time? You're looking at it. This was it. And they only played for like less than an hour, but it was just phenomenal. And so you could even see the club's logo, 100 there in the background, the 0, and there it's written. And here's Keith, and there's Ronnie, and Mick and Townsend. The thing I love about it is, like I said, it was all spontaneous. Mick actually took requests. He just like, all right, what do you want to hear? And, only blues stuff, no Stones stuff. And I also love the fact that they didn't make a dime. I mean, the Stones don't play for free, but they did on this night, and it was a very special night. So that same week in London, a couple days after that show at the 100 Club, the Stones are going to get a Grammy Award. And it's their first ever Grammy Award. Can you believe that it took until 1986 for the Stones to get a Grammy Award? Christopher Cross gets one and Debbie Boone gets one, but no, not the Stones, no. So the thing is, it's a Lifetime Achievement Award, meaning they had not won it after existing all those years for like a quarter of a century, and now we're going to give you the Lifetime Achievement Award. So the Stones were not happy about it, and the Stones don't care about awards anyway. But their record company, they have a new record out, the Dirty Work album, and their record company, CBS, says, listen, we finagled a thing where you can show your new video, the Harlem Shuffle video, for 2 minutes, or I think it was 2.5 minutes, of national, prime time TV. And all you have to do is just accept this stupid award. So the Stones say, okay, but we're going to be in London at the time. So, and the Grammys emanate from Los Angeles. So in order for the Stones to accept this on live TV, they had to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, London time. And so we all show up to this place called the Roof Garden Club on Kensington High Street, a fancy part of London. And we first get there like at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Eric Clapton is the one that's going to present them with these little plaques and things. And so he does, and Mick gives a speech, kind of like disparaging the whole thing. And it's all on network TV, And Kenny Rogers was the guy in LA saying, oh, now we go to London where Eric Clapton's going to, anyway. So, and then they cut back after Mick is making fun of like the whole music industry, and like Kenny Rogers is like, his mouth is hanging open, he doesn't know what to say. So anyway, like I said, this is at the Roof Garden Club in London, and at the end of the night, now it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and the place is cleared out, and there's only a few of us left, including me, Keith, and Ronnie. And Keith comes up behind me and grabs me under the arm like bride and groom, and he says, William, you're coming with me. And, well, where are we going? We're going to Eric Clapton's house. That's where we're going. So this photo is a candid photo of us leaving the Roof Garden Club. I don't know who's in between us there or behind us, some woman I have never seen before since I don't know who she was. But that's me and Keith walking out of the Roof Garden Club and getting into a limousine with Ronnie Wood, and Bill Graham, the concert promoter, was there too, and Chuck Leavell, the Stones' replacement piano player. And so we all go to Eric Clapton's house. And this is not like his big estate in the countryside. This is just his little crash pad in town. And so we go, and one of the things that Keith said to Ronnie was, we're going to tear the place apart, man, because he's moving tomorrow. Like, okay. And so Clapton, first we get there, and the place is empty. There's just like a few folding chairs. Like there's no furniture left. And except in the corner, there are cases of booze. And that's it. So we hang out for like another couple of hours. Clapton was very nice to me, although at one point he comes up to me and starts grilling me, like asking me how old I am, which I hated giving away my age because I thought it could be used against me. I'm younger than everybody at that point. I was only 23. And he guessed it. He says, oh, I bet you're around 23. And when I was your age, I was already wrapping it up with cream and starting Derek and the Dominoes. And it's like, I know. Which I think he was maybe just reminiscing out loud. I don't, God does not need to pat himself on the back, But he was actually very nice. And as we're getting ready to leave, now it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going back. I was staying at the YMCA, by the way, in London. I do recommend it. It was like 10 pounds a night, you know, it was like less than like $11 American or something. And of course, Keith and Ronnie are staying at the Savoy Hotel, you know. But anyway, so we're all leaving, and Clapton says, you know, hang on a minute, guys, wait a second. You know, I'm moving tomorrow, and if you guys don't take all that booze in the corner, my landlord's gonna get it. And so that's all Keith and Ronnie needed to hear. And so this is February, and they're wearing these big, long winter coats. Well, you can't really tell there. But the two of them run into the corner, and they just start packing bottles of Jack Daniels into their pockets. And as we walk out, Keith turns to Clapton and says, "Glad to be of service." So we come back to New York, and the task of promoting the Dirty Work album falls squarely on Keith, because Mick doesn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the Stones. He is a solo artist now in his mind. So one of the interviews that Keith did was for a show you might remember called Friday Night Videos on NBC. Keith was actually on it twice, but this time now is when the Dirty Work album came out. And at this point, they had rotating hosts. So this week, I assume you can recognize, that's Paul Schaefer, with a little bit more hair than he has now. And the thing that we're smiling about there is that Paul Schaefer, this is kind of flattering to me, I guess, Paul Schaefer just got Keith to autograph one of my issues, my latest issue. And what was funny about it is Paul Schaefer was like always turning up wherever the Stones were, and so I was writing about it. And so Paul Schaefer's name is in that issue, and Keith found his name, circled it, and wrote "More Paul next issue," which of course was true, because then I wrote about this and had this photo in it. So that's what we're laughing about at that moment. Another interesting story about this night was, so part of the show, in addition to like interview portion, was that Paul was interviewing him, but they also were jamming. And so they did a few songs, and then Stone songs, and then Keith was going to sing his signature song from the Dirty Work album, which is called "Sleep Tonight." And for this one, Keith really needed to sing the whole song. This was going to be like the big spotlight on Keith. He couldn't remember the lyrics. And so the TV producers don't know what to do, and then it suddenly occurred to me. I happened to have with me at that time, that night, copies of the Dirty Work album. Now, I hated getting autographs. I hated it, always. But I used to have a thing in every issue where there would be a contest to win one of the Stones' autographs. So I knew that I was going to see Keith this night, and so I brought the Dirty Work album with me. I don't know if you can really see it, but it's down here, sitting on an anvil. And the thing that occurred to me is that the Dirty Work album was the first Stones album ever that has the lyrics printed on the inner sleeve. So when the TV producer is like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do? Keith Richards can't remember his own song." It's like, wait, here, a cheat sheet. And so Keith was able to use the album's inner sleeve as a cheat sheet, and he wound up singing "Sleep Tonight" for a national TV audience. So we hung out for a while after this, and we're chatting, and we go out onto the street, and it's me and Keith and Paul Schaefer, a bunch of people that are working for the show. And it's a professional TV studio where this was being shot, but it was on a residential block. And we're making a lot of noise, and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And so who shows up but New York's finest, the NYPD. And so the funny thing is cop car pulls up, and I elbow Keith like, "Oh my God, they're coming to get you finally." And these guys get out of the car, and like, "Hey guys, can you keep it down? We're getting some complaints from the..." Oh my God, it's Keith Richards! So there was a photographer there that I knew, and I said, "You must get a photo of this." And this is what I used to love to do in the newsletter and in my book also, is just capture those man bites dog moments, just these unusual moments. Because trust me, the last time Keith was photographed with the cops, he was not smiling. And don't even ask what's in his little medicine bag there. It's a good thing the cops didn't. So the guy, you know, he takes out his pad where he writes tickets, and he gets Keith to sign his little ticket pad there. And they're totally excited to meet Keith Richards, you know, and why not? I mean, look at them. Look how young they are. And that's the thing that I point out in my book and in the issue at the time was, like, this truly shows the changing of the guard, you know? Like, now the cops are us. We are the establishment, you know? Because Keith said, you know, in the old days, they would have busted me. In fact, I'm sure their fathers on the force probably did. You know? I still wonder if these two cops have any idea that that photo is in my book, you know. So around the same time, Ron Wood hires me to write a book with him. And it's half artwork and half autobiographical. And as you can see, he's like a closet artist. Well, not so much anymore. He makes a lot of money. But here he did a thing of Chuck Berry. Here's Keith Moon, Bob Marley. He's got Bob Dylan. You can barely see there. And this is in the basement of his house on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And Ronnie, I mean, I think he has ADD, but I mean that in a good way. Like, he's very creative, but he like jumps around from one thing to the other. So this basement had like his art studio, which you can't really see there, but also his music studio, and he would jump from one to the other. Occasionally, I would even see him like with the guitar strapped on and a paintbrush at the easel, you know, and then, all right, let's finish this song. Oh, no, let's finish the painting, you know. So, but this became like the hangout place. And so, like I said, he hired me, and I started hanging out in this basement and in his kitchen. Like, I would go over to his house like 3 nights a week. And it was pretty heady stuff because I was 23 years old at the time. And you never knew, this is the interesting thing, it was almost like a vaudeville skit or something out of Pee Wee Herman. Like, the doorbell would ring, and like, we don't know who it is. You open the door, and it's like, well, it's Mick Jagger, everybody. And so one night, Mick comes over, and he says he wants to use Ronnie's studio to record a demo for his next solo album. And so if Keith had found out that Mick was using Ronnie's equipment to record something for his next solo album, Keith would have come over and strangled both of them. But, you know, Ronnie's a very agreeable guy, and so we go down to the basement. Now, this is just the 3 of us, me, Mick, and Ronnie. And he starts recording a song that wound up being called Peace for the Wicked, and it did wind up on his next album. But he wanted to just do like a basic track for his own reference of this song because he had just written it. And so we go down to the basement, and Mick and Ronnie start playing. Ronnie's actually playing the drums there. If you could see, there's a drum kit. And Mick is playing guitar, sitting on that chair there. And I'm on the other side of the room, and Mick tosses me a tambourine and tells me that I should play tambourine. I'm like, no, thank you. And, you know, whenever I fantasized about jamming with the Stones, it wasn't, you know, being the girl from the Partridge Family playing the tambourine. So, but then what happens is, so they finish recording the basic tracks, and Mick says, well, now I'm going to do the vocals. And he says, I want you guys to thicken up the chorus for me. I want you to help me. So there's only one microphone. You know, this one I say, okay, fine. So there's only one microphone. Mick is in the middle. Woody is leaning over this way, and I'm leaning over this way. And, you know, if you had told me that one day I'd be singing with Mick Jagger, you know, when I was like 10 years old, I would have had you committed, you know. But here I am. I'm standing and singing next to Mick Jagger. And I figure this is my chance to do my Mick for Mick, right, you know. But unfortunately, forget it. I got nervous or whatever, and I think I sounded more like Dwight D. Eisenhower than Mick Jagger. So he had no idea what I was trying to do. But we had a great time that night. And at one point, Ron Wood's wife calls down to us saying that someone's at the door. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, it turns out it's the cops. And they're getting complaints from the neighbors because we're playing the music too loud. We were listening back to the song and playing it too loud. And so Ronnie runs upstairs to talk to the cops, leaving me and Mick in this basement here. And Mick's mood just changes. I mean, like a tropical storm just comes in all of a sudden, and he gets in my face about something that I had written. Long story, you can read about it in the book, but I said that the only reason that the Stones wound up playing at Live Aid was out of emotional blackmail. They didn't really want to play it, but they kind of got emotionally blackmailed into doing it. Which, you know, they played separately. Mick and then Keith and Ronnie did it. Mick played with like Hall & Oates and Tina Turner, and then Keith and Ronnie played with Bob Dylan. But anyway, so I said that from what I could gather, They didn't want to do it. They had actually agreed not to do it, and then Mick caved first. And then Keith and Ronnie said, well, if Mick's doing it, then we'll go and do it with Bob Dylan. And so I wrote about that in my latest issue. Mick took offense to that. I don't like what you wrote. I don't like it. It's not true. It's not emotional blackmail at all. And it just gets in my face, and I am literally and figuratively backing up from Mick Jagger. And I'm 23 years old, and like my favorite rock star is chewing me out, and it was very, very intimidating, I have to say. And so that's like, again, you know, nice bunch of guys. We were having this fun time. He's telling me to play tambourine. He's inviting me to sing backup. And now he's like in my face about something. And I mean, he would not let go. I mean, we were literally going, well, that's my take on the situation. That's not true. How dare you? How dare you? It's not true. It's not true. It's not emotional blackmail at all. So anyway, so that's Mick. Another night, well, a few nights, doorbell rings, in walks Keith, you know. We go down here, and I watch them jam, and, you know, I'm the only audience member. And, you know, those are my favorite moments, you know, of my times around the Stones. It's the musical moments, these quiet, little intimate moments in the studio with them or in Ron Wood's basement, you know, watching just Keith and Ronnie jam, and I'm the only audience member. So I remember one night where actually they were at the kitchen table, and I'm sitting across from them, and they're doing all these Beatles and Buddy Holly songs. And somehow it evolves into a farting contest. And these guys have the ability to fart on will. I mean it. And so Keith goes first, you know, and he's doing Buddy Holly, you know, that'll be the day that I, you know. I'm like, wow, Keith, you're a real farter figure to me. And then Ronnie, like, answers him. So anyway, other than that, that was, you know, some of my favorite moments, are the musical moments, hanging out with these guys. And I think Keith was kind of going through a midlife crisis at that point, because it looked like the Stones might never get back together. And so he was just hanging out at Ronnie's house a lot, literally and figuratively farting around. But other than Keith, my favorite guest that came over, one night, me and Ronnie are working on our book, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, doorbell rings, who can that be? And you know, he like everything else in Ronnie's life, the video monitor was broken. He did have a security camera, but it was on the fritz. So we would have to open the door. We open the door, and standing there is Stevie Ray Vaughan with his guitar already strapped on. No guitar case, no gig bag or anything, just he's ready to go. And he wants to come in, go to the basement, and jam. And Ronnie says to him, you mean to tell me that you actually held a cab like that, you know, just with your guitar strapped on? And of course, the answer was yes. And so they go downstairs to this basement, and just an incredible jam session ensues. And again, that's one of my favorite moments. And so our book finally comes out, and there's a big premiere for it in London, and I fly over for that. And Bill Wyman came, and Mick was in town. Mick was in London at the time, but Mick didn't show up because it was tied in with an art exhibition of Ronnie's. And Mick didn't come. He sent a telegram saying, break a leg, Leonardo, which was cute. But, you know, I think Ronnie really wanted Mick to be there. But like I said, Bill Wyman came, some other rock and roll people, like Jeff Beck was there. And, and so Ronnie sees me. I don't know what possessed me to buy this tie before my trip, but I wear this, and first thing Ronnie says to me is, like, I'm glad to see that Colonel Kentucky came to my exhibit. So anyway, so he and I wound up flying back to New York together on Virgin Atlantic Airways, and but the night before, we decided to pull an all-nighter, and we're watching videos. Well, first we started watching a baseball game that was tape delayed. It was the World Series. It was the Cardinals and the Royals, and I'm trying to teach him the rules of baseball, and he just wasn't taking to it, and he was just cracking jokes. And you know, the announcer says, 2 balls on Ozzie Smith, and he goes, I should hope so. But then we start watching videos, and we pop in a video of the Pretenders. And he turns to me, Ronnie, and he says, I just found out recently that I shagged her. We're like, what? Like, what? So, now, I had never heard the word shagged before, but I kind of figured out what it meant. But what do you mean you just found out? that you shagged her. So he explained it to me. It turns out that when he was playing with Rod Stewart and the Faces, before he joined the Stones, they were on tour, and Chrissie Hynde and her friend came to one of the shows. Afterwards, they went back to the hotel, and somehow Chrissie Hynde's friend wound up in Rod's room, and Chrissie Hynde herself wound up in Ronnie's room. And I thought, what a life to have led that you don't remember shagging Chrissie Hynde, but that's the Stones for you. This is us back in New York at a nightclub called the Limelight. This is the VIP room. This is in a deconsecrated church, by the way. And this is the old library of the church, and I guess they kept the books in there, which I don't know why, because anybody that was ever in this VIP room at the Limelight probably didn't know how to read. There were some really shady characters that hung out in this place, and this is where Ronnie met most of his drug dealers. I should point out, this is an important part of the book, is that I never did drugs with these guys, believe it or not. And for a few reasons. One is, like, hanging out with my favorite rock band. That was the high for me. So I wanted to remember every minute of it. So I didn't want to get stoned with these guys. Also, I was a journalist, so I wanted to remember it, in case there was bits of information that I was going to put in the newsletter. So when I'm hanging out with them, sometimes I would be the one person in the room that's not doing drugs. And some people would get a little paranoid, like, hey, Keith, what's with this guy? What is he, a narc or something? And Keith would defend me, it's just Bill, he's here to interview me, he's all right. And I think my other fear was that scene from Annie Hall where they put the Coke in front of Woody Allen and he sneezes. So that would probably have been worse than anything. So just to show you one of the things that was in the book of Ronnie's artwork. So, again, I've had young kids who have no idea who that is. But he told me this great story about Groucho Marx, and I said, we have to put this in the book. You have to draw a thing of Groucho. So the story is, in the 1970s, before Ronnie moved to New York, he was living out in Los Angeles for a while, and the actor Elliot Gould brings Ronnie over to Groucho's house for the Passover Seder. And Groucho opens the door, sees Ronnie. His first line is, "Now that's the silliest haircut I've ever seen." And so Ronnie sits through the Seder and all that stuff. And then afterwards, Groucho, when they're getting ready to leave, Groucho takes him aside and puts his arm around his shoulder, and he starts pointing out to all his wealth and all that. You see this? You see all this wealth? You see this beautiful house? I would give up every dollar I ever earned if I could just get one more erection. So I said, all right, that story must go in. You must do a drawing of Groucho. So one of the things that Keith never wanted to get involved with was a solo album, but he did. And so this was taken in September 1988 at a party for the Talk is Cheap album. Eventually, he realized, like, Mick may never come back to the fold. So enough people had begged him to do a solo album that he finally did. It's a great album. And so this was the party for it. And so this goes to show you that I wasn't a complete teetotaler. I did have some Jack Daniels in that glass. Although I think Keith looks worse for the wear than I do, actually. But anyway, so that's the thing. I didn't do cocaine or pills with them or any of the stuff that they had around. But I did drink a little bit of the Jack Daniels because just hanging out with these guys, it was like impossible not to. Like, I think at their houses, it came out of the tap, It was like, so it was the only thing to drink, but I did it in moderation there. Like I said, Keith looks worse off than me. So that was a nice party. Iggy Pop was there, and Phoebe Snow was there, even Paula Abdul, just like, because they were all on the same record label, Virgin Records. So right around this time, it is now, I'm wearing the damn tie again, even though it's a year later. But around the same time as Keith's solo album, the fall of 1988, it is now the 10th anniversary of my little newsletter, and I decide that I'm going to throw a party to thank everyone who had ever helped me in the 10 years. I invited the kid that snuck me into the high school mimeo room. I invited, people that worked for the Stones. I just invited a ton of people to just come and, and be able to thank them. So So Keith was the only member of the band in town that week. And I called his house. I sent an invitation there, and then I called to follow up. And they told me that Keith and Patty, so that's Keith's wife, Patty Hansen again, and this is Sarah Dash, who was in Keith's solo band, because he toured with the Talk Is Cheap album. I had a band called the Expensive Winos, and so she was the female singer in the band. So anyway, so they told me that Keith has a rehearsal for his tour, for his solo tour, and so he can't come. And, but it was very nice that Patty shows up and Sarah Dash show up, but Keith has to be at a rehearsal. So at one point, everyone asked me to give a speech, and so I do, where I thank everyone for the previous 10 years. And then just as a joke, I end it by saying, listen, I know you're all here because you think the Stones are going to be here, or one of the Stones, but they're not. Sorry, too bad. I hop off the stage, and well, the joke was on me, because Keith was standing there the whole time. I couldn't see with the lights in my eyes, but he was just standing there the whole time. And you could kind of tell like how gratified I am that he's there. He was just terrific. He really was this night. I mean, he always is. And because like everybody at my party got a door prize from him. And if you wanted his autograph, he signed something for you, or even just a handshake or your photo with him. He was just terrific. So the thing is, I wasn't going to invite my parents. And it's because like this party was for young people, not for people in their mid-50s. This is 1988. And, but then I realized my parents are so proud of me, even though, we have nothing in common. But they're so proud of me, like, they love the Fiddler on the Roof, yet they had pictures of me with the Stones, like in their dining room. They have like a shrine to me and framed covers of the newsletter. So it's like, oh my God, how could I not invite my parents? So I do, and they do come. And I'm so busy at this party. It was like my life is flashing before my eyes, or at least the last 10 years. Everybody, who had helped me. And that it didn't occur to me to introduce my parents to Keith. I mean, why would my parents want to meet Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones? They don't know anything about the Stones. At one point, I see a whole bunch of flashbulbs going off on the other side of the room. And I look over, and there's Bernie and Sylvia German with Keith. And the woman there, that's Keith's manager, Jane Rose. But anyway, so Bernie and Sylvia, and yes, I know my mom looks like the character from Saturday Night Live, Linda Richmond. I know. She knows it too. And so I found out what happened from like eyewitnesses, because I was on the other side of the room. So Keith is walking around, and at one point, my dad grabs Keith by the shoulder and says, "Hey, Keith, we're Bill's parents." And Keith turns around and says, "Well, you've got quite a boy there." People ask me, like, what was this scene like? And I say, well, imagine Dracula meeting the Costanzas. So here's my parents, the two kosher deli workers from Brooklyn, and they're meeting Keith. And, again, this is one of the things that my book is about, that I was a fish out of water. I'm just a regular fan. Like, where do I come to hang out with the Stones? It's such an unlikely story, and I guess this photo kind of epitomizes that. I actually have a better photo of this scene in the book from a better angle. But it almost looks like Keith can't believe it. It's like, can you believe I'm meeting Bill's parents? The two kosher deli workers from Brooklyn. I asked Keith, like, I said, surely this must be a sign of the apocalypse, I said, I never thought, like, you would meet my parents, But they got along swimmingly. So about a year, or less than a year after this picture, the Stones go on tour. They do finally get back together. A large reason is the almighty dollar. I hate to say it, but it's true. And Mick and Keith got back together, and the whole band, and they go on tour. The Steel Wheels album comes out, which is a very good album, I think. And they go on this great tour that just changes the whole touring industry, for better or for worse. And for me, this is when things kind of change. All of a sudden, access got harder. because now they have, managers and promoters and bodyguards. I mean, there was never bodyguards when I'm hanging out with Keith and Ronnie, or Ronnie's basement a few times a week. But now there are bodyguards, and now there's so many layers of people that you have to go through. And for me, just to interview Keith or Ronnie, I have to go through a publicist. It used to be like, hey, Ronnie, I'm coming over in 5 minutes. Now I have to do it through a publicist. So it started to make my job a little bit harder. And now that money became such a big thing for the Stones, and there's so many people involved, they got a little tighter about what I could write. Like Mick, would tell me what not to put in there anymore, more than usual. And it really, kind of, the mystique was kind of gone. Also, I started to see some of the shows from on stage, for instance, which was, a phenomenal experience. But I got to see how the magicians did their tricks. Like there was one part of the concert where Mick emerges from a ball of fire and he's 100 feet above the stage. Well, I would see Mick inside this little elevator compartment coming back down from there. So it was almost like seeing Houdini in a secret compartment. So it kind of like demystified the Stones for me as a fan. And like I said, more than anything, it was the money part that really started to, turn me off a bit. They hopped into bed with Donald Trump, and for their Atlantic City shows, they charged $250 a ticket, which seems like nothing now. No one bristles at a $250 Stones ticket. But at that time, when other tours were charging like $15, $20, here are the Stones and Donald Trump charging $250. And so I wrapped it up then, January '96, and the Stones wrote little notes for the farewell issue, including Ronnie Wood, who added a little drawing. And so yes, that's me walking away from it all, wearing a raincoat that I used to have. And it was a running joke. I used to always come to his house with a briefcase where I had all my notes and everything. So, and BB for Beggar's Banquet. And there's like an issue there in the puddle. And he drew me with a banana in my hand, which was a running joke. Whenever I would go to his house, I was a starving writer, he would tell me, I could eat whatever I want. And like the first thing I always went for was just like a banana in the fruit bowl on the kitchen table. So I was like kind of touched that he remembered the banana, like our inside joke. And he wrote, "Dear Bill, we shall miss the great instructional monthly." I don't even know what that means, instructional monthly. Great instructional monthly, very much. How will we know from now on where we all are and what each of us has been up to? Because they really did. They would read it. Keith would find out what Mick is up to by reading my newsletter and vice versa. Don't disappear too long. We want you near for the next thing. Love, Ronnie. And that was it. And it was a great ride. Lots of ups, lots of downs. I capture it all in the book. If you get the book or have the book, I hope you enjoy it or have enjoyed it. I think it captures a time period that other books don't capture, which is them on the verge of a breakup and then, coming back to having the most successful tour ever, the Steel Wheels tour, and then just continuing on with being this mega corporation, for better or for worse. And it also captures some of those Spinal Tap type of moments of like Keith meeting my parents and other like Spinal Tap moments. It's all in the book, and like I said, if you read it, I hope you enjoy it, because it's written from your perspective. Like I said at the outset, I was just a fan, I still am, but a fan who got to know the Rolling Stones. So if you have any questions, throw them on up.
3 quick ones. You haven't said anything about Charlie. Were
Yes.
you on the payroll during this time? And when was the last time you've had any interaction or contact with him?
Okay, I'll do it backwards. Last interaction was like a while ago, was the Bridges to Babylon tour. I saw them at the press conference for that. Wait, Bridges to Babylon? No. It was Bigger Bang. Sorry, Bigger Bang at the press conference. But really, I have not really like hung out with them in a long time, like really hanging like I used to. Was I on the payroll? Yes. When it became the official thing, I was on the payroll. Make a long story short, it's all in the book. That financial arrangement only lasted like a year and a half, and I actually liked it better when I was not on their payroll because I got some of my independence back. And that's when I didn't have to submit my issues to them pre-publication. Charlie, yes. I did not mention Charlie. It's kind of a running joke throughout the book that I barely had a relationship with Charlie. I mean, it's a true story that every opportunity that I had to speak to Charlie, like something would get in the middle and it would never happen. And so Charlie and I have exchanged maybe like 20 words in like our whole history together. And Charlie's a really nice guy. He's not a standoffish guy, but he is a British eccentric. You know, he collects horses and he lets them roam around the house, which must be an incredible cleanup job. He collects cars, even though he doesn't drive, and expensive cars like Lamborghinis. He likes just sitting in them. So anyway, I figured like I have nothing in common with this guy. I love Charlie as a drummer and everything as a person, but we had nothing in common, you know, and so that's why Charlie never really came up in the story. I do have some stuff about him in the book, though, and how I tried to interview him a bunch of times and it never happened. And like I said, it's kind of a running joke that, you know, the nasty guys in people's minds, Mick and Keith, you know, those are the ones I felt close to, and yet Charlie was the one I almost was intimidated by. You know, anybody else? Down here?
I was wondering, when you read Keith's book, what did you think of it?
Well, I have to admit, I have not read his book. Well, basically, I know everything in there anyway, right? No, it's such a large book that I figure I need to like set aside some time. But I did skim through it. People are actually telling me they like mine better than Keith's, but that's besides the point. It's involved different perspectives, I guess. But the thing that struck me was that he got certain things wrong chronologically, which I guess is not a big deal, really. But you know, he talks about how important his father was to him, and then he gets the date of his father's death wrong, which, like, by a couple of years, was like, wow, you know, you'd think that like he meant so much to you, and then you go and snort his ashes and all that, you would remember when he died. But you know, whatever, that's Keith, and you know, I wasn't surprised that there were some inaccuracies. I think there was one here, and then we'll get back there.
Is your magazine archived somewhere that we can read it?
Yes.
Read all the
well,
issues?
if you go to billgerman.com, somewhere on there you'll see a link. I still have a website just for the old newsletter, and you can order back issues. I sell like a whole stack of them. It averages like $1.25 each or something, so it's a pretty good deal. But yeah, go to billgerman.com. I see you have the book, so billgerman.com. Not that you'll forget it, but it's in the book there on the jacket.
Like a lot of people in the room, I've been reading about the Rolling Stones forever, almost to the point where you feel like you know them, but you don't. What would you say for each of them would be something that would really surprise somebody who's been like a lifelong fan and knows a lot about the Stones?
Something about them?
About them individually, Mick, that would really be something that you would never know.
You know, well, again, you know, people make Keith out to be like the devil or something, and he's not. He was like the sweetest guy to me and incredibly generous. And people think that he's like a drunken idiot or something like that. And Keith is brilliant. I mean, he's probably the best read out of any of the Stones. Well, at least in terms of books and stuff like that. I'm sure Mick reads the Wall Street Journal a lot. But, you know, I think it's a matter of like public perception versus who they really are. That's maybe the biggest surprise, you know, in terms of the Stones. I mean, that's a big question. It's a good question, but, and I think, you know, that, like I was just talking about Charlie, that, you know, he's actually a very nice guy, but he's just incredibly shy and eccentric. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, you know, they're just, some of it, to a degree, they're just average guys with an extraordinary talent and an extraordinary life, and, you know, 50 years already.
That's all the time we have, but first, thank you to Bill. And
thank you, everybody.